who has time or emotional capacity for all of that work? And I'm just going to use this as a moment to say, y'all, if you do not have the time and emotional capacity, you're not charging enough for your sessions, because you shouldn't be seeing so many clients that you don't have time to provide the highest level of care. And if that's your situation, then we got to figure out ways for you to be able to get paid more per hour. And there are 100 different ways to do that. Doesn't necessarily mean having to go cash pay or whatever. There's lots of ways to do that.
Welcome to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. This episode is sponsored by the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. Hi, I'm Janine Wolf, and I'm your colleague down the hall. I have a passion for helping fellow therapists get the clinical and collegial support we all need to do this work. And wow, it just keeps getting harder every day. I'm the founder and facilitator of the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. I have been a social worker for almost 30 years, and I own a successful solo online private practice. More of us than ever are practicing in solo or online practices, and we all need colleagues to process cases with, commiserate with on those really hard days, and also to celebrate our successes with. In this podcast, I'll bring you insights about trends and changes in our field and sit down with amazing therapists who are doing amazing work. We'll discuss fictionalized cases, ways to practice sustainably, and of course, there will be plenty of laughing. I love laughing with friends. I'm so glad to have you as one of my colleagues down the hall. Hello, everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Janine Wolf, and I'm so excited to be joined today by my friend Amber Lyda, who has been instrumental in helping me grow an online practice and become an entrepreneur. Amber is a psychologist who for years let her inner go-getter trample all over her inner life-haver. She found a way to continue to do the work she loved without sacrificing the life she wanted. She left her agency job and started an online-only cash pay therapy practice. She works at home with her dogs and most often in her pajama pants. Me too, Amber. I love that. Now she helps other therapists to find more freedom, flexibility, and flow too. She teaches therapists to build successful online therapy practices, market to cash pay clients in and out of their immediate area, and build income outside of therapy. Today, we're going to talk about how dealing with clinical emergencies naturally raises our anxiety, but especially so when we're working online. She's going to walk us through how to protect your clients and your practice when clinical emergencies arise in your online practice. Welcome, Amber. I'm so excited you're here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. So I basically became an online therapist because of Amber Lyda. I didn't even know that it's what I wanted to do. I just sort of discovered you in Facebook, and you have so many valuable resources in your Facebook group. And then I got bitten by the bug and I was like, oh, I want to work from home. I want to work in my pajamas. And so I transitioned my whole practice fully online, and you were right there with me every step of the way, supporting me. So I just want to throw out there that a lot of people went online because of the pandemic, but I'm not sure that people are really in the mindset that you can still continue to do this work online if you want. Just because the world has opened back up doesn't mean you have to go back into an office.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of therapists, at least in my group, they caught the bug as well, and they are never going back to an office.
Yeah, I can say that for myself as well. Yeah. And it's so much easier now. I transitioned fully online in 2019, and, everyone wasn't online. There was a lot of naysayers. My clients weren't thrilled, but, all of them except one came with me, and they were actually very excited when the pandemic happened because they could tell their friends how to get on Zoom and do all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it is like, it's a lifestyle. I can travel and still see a client or two, so I don't lose all of my income while I'm traveling. There's so many advantages to it.
Absolutely. I remember even when I left my agency job and I was in my first couple of weeks of seeing clients at home, there was a 2-hour break between seeing clients. And in my old office, I would have been like, all right, time to do admin work. But it was a beautiful day outside. And I was like, wait a minute, I could go get in the pool for an hour. What? My mind was blown.
Yeah, all of those little things, being able to take my dog for a walk in the middle of the day, being able to throw in a load of laundry, like it's those when you had those blocks of time or the no shows, or I just remember I was so unprepared in solo practice for how lonely I was going to be and eating lunch by myself and sitting there by myself and being able to be in my home, not only all of those benefits, but now I get to have a home office deduction. I cut down my overhead massively. So I immediately got a raise just by closing my office.
Yeah,
And so there's so many different ways that you can really benefit from this type of work.
I agree. And then honestly, the number one thing I was afraid of when I was thinking about having an online private practice, I was afraid of messing something up and getting in trouble. There just wasn't that much information about how to do it legally and ethically. So, I was very neurotic about that. And then the other thing that I was so frightened of was, what if a client has a crisis while we're in session online? Or what if, they have a crisis outside of session, but it's telehealth? And what does that mean? And I got so nervous and anxious about it that it held me back for a long time. And then I thought, all right, Amber, just sit down and make a freaking plan and let's see if the plan will work. And then you can get over this fear. And I think probably it's a fear that a lot of private practice people have, because it's very different when you're in an office with colleagues down the hall that you can run in and check and be like, hey, did I cover all my bases? You're in private practice and you don't have that. And then you add the layer of being online and not in the same physical space as your client, and it just increases that anxiety.
Right. And something I remembered you saying, which I embrace completely, is I have a low risk tolerance. So you really did a lot of research and taught like all of the things to really be aware of and where to find the resources and how to get them, so that you, like, we learned from your hard lessons, right? Because you shared a few, and maybe we'll get into some of those today, but some things that were just not something you're prepared for until you're in the moment. And so if you really have that comprehensive training, and you were really one of the first people who was teaching all of that, it can give you that little extra bit of peace of mind. I mean, our work, you never have full peace of mind because you never know what's going to happen when a session when a client comes in, but knowing that you're at least dotting the I's, crossing the T's, that can be helpful.
Totally agree. Yeah. Any obstacle that we can get out of the way to help you live a fuller life is, a big deal to me. So if it's a fear of messing up or a fear of how the hell am I going to handle a crisis, and we can give you that information so that you can jump in and have all the benefits of an online practice, I'm all about sharing that info.
Great. Okay. All right. So why don't we start with how to plan ahead?
Okay. So I did take notes. So I will be peeking down the screen. If y'all are watching on video, you're going to see my eyes drop down because, OCPD, I don't want to leave anything out, right? So I thought about like 3 ways to think through managing risk online in your telehealth practice, and thought about, okay, so before the appointments start, what are things that we need to do? During the crisis itself, what do we need to think about? And then afterwards, what do we need to think about? So in that first section of before that appointment even comes about, I think about like, what the heck is your scope of service? So the clients that I want to bring into my practice when I'm solo and online are different than the clients that I love seeing when I'm in an agency or a group practice and I have colleagues that can help me and take emergency calls or whatever if I'm in a session. So for myself, I just sort of put in my mind, my scope of service is definitely going to exclude people who need in between session support, people who have recently been in a crisis stabilization unit, people who have had a recent suicide attempt, folks with low impulse control and low coping strategies, all the kinds of things we would basically think about as we're moving into like a pre-screening to see if somebody is a good fit for our business model, right? A single person run telehealth practice. So kind of just having in your mind who's appropriate for your practice and who's not. And then number 2, doing a kick butt job in that pre-screening to figure out, as much as you can in a 20-30 minute free consultation, if that person is a good fit, if their needs fit. And then one of the things that holds a lot of therapists back is thinking ahead about how are you going to say it to someone if they're not a good fit for your solo practice? Because I think that sometimes holds us back. We take people in because we don't know how to say it in a way that's going to land well. So being able to say like, I really want you to be able to have support between sessions if you need it. And because I'm in session all the time, I'm not the person who can give it to you. So I need to get you in a situation where there are more staff available to support you. Or, a lot of therapists will use that analogy about you have a broken leg, I can't hand you a Band-Aid. I don't really love that one because it kind of is pathologizing, but I will say things like the sort of therapy that I do is going to help folks with this kind of situation. But there's a different sort of therapy, and it just happens to be one that I don't do that will help with your situation. So let me help you find a therapist who does that sort of therapy or offers that kind of support. But do the scripts, write your scripts, because otherwise it gets really hard to say in the moment. And what we're thinking might be like, I'm not going to be able to handle this client solo. And that's certainly not how we want to message it to the client.
Yeah, and I agree about the scripts. I think very few of us are trained on how to turn away a client either before their first session or after the first session. And I have really learned over the years to tap into my intuition. And I've been helping my members understand this. Like, that client that in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, I'm not sure. And now you're miserable that you took them on because they're not the right fit. Like, listen to that intuition, because that's informed by our training, our experience, all of those things. And having the scripts and practicing them and be prepared to say to somebody exactly what you said. And even after that first session, sometimes we discover that we're not the right fit and we don't have the words for that. So having a script so you can feel confident is so important.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes we get suckered in because we have that little feeling. We don't know how to say, you need to see somebody else. But then sometimes clients will say things like, well, you're the first person that I've really felt connected to, or, nobody's been able to understand my issue the way that you seem to. And that really appeals to our narcissism and to our ego. And then I think also that part of us agrees that there aren't that many, it's hard to find a great therapist. And so we think it's going to be easier to take that client on than to do the co-work of finding a great therapist for them. And, having made that mistake multiple times, it would be so much easier just to spend the time to find the right fit for that person, or to help them find the right fit, than to take that person into your practice.
Absolutely. And I so agree with what you said about our narcissism. One of the fictionalized case consultations that I did involved a therapist who had gone online, and now a client has reached back out and there is some domestic violence going on. And so they're like, I can't work with this person because of domestic violence, but she says she won't see anyone else. So anyway, it was a very interesting discussion, but all those things crop up. Like the fake therapist knew it was a bad idea to bring this person on, but the client is like, but you and I work so well together and I only trust you, and so then you're like, okay, but, those are really hard to resist.
They're really hard to resist. They're really hard to resist. And especially when you know that you could help them, but just because you have the clinical skill to help them does not mean that your practice can hold them. Those are two totally different things. And that, I think that's sometimes helpful to have in mind too. Like, yeah, I might be a good fit for you, but me in a solo practice isn't a good fit for you.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we are our product, but it's more than just us. It's the whole big picture of this private practice and the legalities and the ethics and putting all those things into place, and not so much the ego of this person says they'll only see me, but no, what is the big picture? Let's look at that.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. So I'm going to continue on with the prep stuff. So we talked about kind of screening, scope of practice, how to refer out, but then you need to cover your behind in your paperwork too. So let's say you're past the pre-screening, they seem like a good fit, they're filling out your informed consent, huge paperwork in there for me, and you all can do whatever you want to do. Not only do I cover when I would break confidentiality and when their state says that I would need to hospitalize and all of that kind of stuff, but I also add a piece in about if you were to go into a medical emergency, is there someone living in your home that I can have a phone number to? Because they might not be in a mental health emergency, but if they fall over and start having a seizure And I know that they live with their mom, and I could just call their mom to come upstairs and be with them. Because in a physical office, if somebody were having a seizure, I would lean down and I would protect their head, and I would do, the few things that I know to do. So it wouldn't hit the threshold necessarily of breaking confidentiality per our license, but just common sense wise, it seems to me like a good way to protect yourself in your paperwork. And then the other piece that, and I know that this is a pain in the butt and it's extra work, but I'd rather do it up front when I'm not panicked, is finding out what the hospitalization protocol is in their area. So even if you're licensed in only one state, let's say you're licensed in Florida like I am, well, every county in Florida handles involuntary hospitalization differently. And in some, you call the police to transport them. In some, you would call a mobile crisis, response unit. In some, you could send them to one hospital, and that hospital is going to send them to another hospital. So knowing which hospital is the receiving facility, it's a pain in the butt. However, it's really worth it if you end up in crisis with that client, not having to make 50 phone calls in the middle of a crisis and hope nothing's happening to that client while you're making those calls. So doing a little bit of groundwork ahead of time can be really useful. And I've had international clients where it was just totally, I had a client in Japan, and it was totally freaking overwhelming for me to try to figure it out. And so I basically put it on her and was like, listen, I'd love to work with you, but I can't figure this out. So here's what I would need to have to be able to take you on. And she found all of the information and was able to provide it to me. And then we put it in the paperwork.
Yeah, that's great. And we sometimes feel like we have to do all the things, but it is a partnership in some levels with our clients. And especially if they're kind of pushing us against some of our, good feelings to make sure, okay, they really are committed. They're going to do this. So we both have peace of mind.
Yes, yes. And you brought up like instances where things have not gone well for me and how sharing those might have helped other people. So I will share this with you. I had a client, and I screen the heck out of my clients, y'all. However, stuff happens and people's lives change. Like, you can't predict a psychotic break. You can't predict that there's going to be some sort of assault that sends somebody into, a spiral. You just can't. So I had a client, they were in crisis. We were talking things through, and I went to pull up my electronic record of, our plan, our informed consent, and all of my releases and all of that. And I lost internet. So two issues happened. I should have had all of that printed out so that just in case that kind of thing happened, I would have it in front of me. And then the other issue that it never had even occurred to me is that because my phone was a voice over IP, when my stupid internet went out, my stupid phone went out too. And their contact information was not in my phone, it was in the software for the voice over IP. So I had no freaking way to find their contact information or to contact them over my HIPAA compliant phone. Thankfully, the internet came back on and I was able to talk with them, but I thought, never again. I will always have that contact information printed out, and I will always be able to access them as a backup plan on my regular phone because I'll have that contact information printed out. That was such a bad feeling.
Yeah. And yes. And that is the big lesson that I learned from you too. And even extending it beyond, the different things we need to have available. I know that sometimes I will have a client who's out running errands and they will be in a parking lot somewhere and do the session, which is fine. I say that's fine as long as you're not driving, but I need to know like where you are, and I need to know a description of your car and the license plate, which we lose track of thinking that you need to have that, but you really do. So you're just going to say, hey, randomly go to the parking lot at Walmart and look for someone who might be in distress.
Right. That's a great point. That, I never thought about like the car description. That's a really good point. I've had clients who did that, for every session. They would go to a different place, a park or whatever. And so you can have on your phone the option for them to drop a pin of their location. But it never occurred to me until you said that even if the police have the pin, there are going to be a bunch of cars there. They're not going to know which car is my client's car. Great point. Great point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that happened as well as a result of having a client who just didn't look quite right, and thinking like, okay, well, I know what parking lot they're in, but I'm not going to really be able to provide much more information than that. And again, that, that low tolerance for stress and low tolerance for risk, really. And I learned so much of that from you, just like, okay, like you said, we're planning ahead. These are the things that we're going to put in place so we don't have those scary things happen. And I joke all the time that the majority of things that have been added to my informed consent over the years are because something happened with the client that I never would have anticipated. And now it's a rule in the informed consent.
Yes, yes. And you guys can make your informed consent work however it needs to work. I had a client who was undergoing some very serious medical treatment, and there was the potential that, they might not get all the way through. And so we built into the informed consent that, she was going to provide my contact information to her family, and that way they could get in touch with me if things were going downhill. So you can move beyond what the state legal requirements are to have your practice policies, which can be even more narrow than, say, what the legal policies are. And that's just think creatively.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my informed consent now is like 7 pages, which I think is ridiculous, but it does cover all those things.
Yep.
And I know that most of the clients probably don't read it. So that's why that first session I do review the things that are in there, because that's something that I've learned over the years, and also from your training, that I know that I go to doctor's offices and I'm like, informed consent. Okay, I'm going to sign it. I don't read all the words. I might glance through it. And so we need to not presume that our clients know all these things, that we actually walk them through it.
I completely agree. And I sell an informed consent, but I'm redoing it right now because I saw somebody have this great idea, which is to have a cover page where it just summarizes the bullet point of each of the sections so that they have to initial those as well and just sign the informed consent. I was like, that's freaking brilliant, because none of us read. Mine's 10 pages. Nobody's reading all that. So if they can just see the bullet points, and if one kind of snags their attention and they're like, wait, what? Then they can go to that page and read it more in depth. And I thought, you know what? I would actually look at a 1-page outline, even though I'm certainly not going through 10 pages of 10-point font writing.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I really love that. And just making sure that they can easily access it as well. I don't like going to doctor's offices where I sign this long informed consent with all the practice policies and everything else, and then I give the copy back to them. And so like they need to have a copy. So they're like, what is that cancellation fee she told me about? And being able to look that up and empowering them to be able to understand how their interactions with us is working.
Absolutely. And therapists avoid talking about that cancellation policy. They're like, well, it's in the informed consent, right? And then they feel funky about actually enforcing it because they know darn well that client didn't read it, and they also felt too uncomfortable to say it out loud. Yeah, I think it's really important to talk it through and then have that little front page. I think that's just so brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that idea.
Speaking of lessons learned, one thing that has happened to me a number of times that I just want to make other therapists aware of so that you can cover your own booty is when I have had to facilitate an involuntary or even a voluntary hospitalization. Most states, in that moment where you're facilitating it, you're allowed to talk to the receiving facility or whoever the heck you want to that will help to secure the safety of that client. But as soon as that safety is secured, you no longer have a right to talk to anybody. And so I have had situations where I've helped clients get into a receiving facility, been able to talk with the peeps, they're in, and then 2-3 days go by and I haven't heard a word from anybody. Because if you don't sign a release, get a release signed for that receiving facility, they can't talk to you and you can't talk to them. And you might think, well, that's okay because they're the clinician of record now, and now it's their responsibility to take care of the client, which is not okay, by the way. But just in case your brain did go there, they will often then release that client back into your care in their paperwork to cover their own butts. So they are like handing off the clinician of record back to you. In most of the cases where I have had a client need to be hospitalized, things have taken such a severe turn, which is why they need to be hospitalized in the first place, that it's not appropriate for them to return to a solo private practice after that. They either need, intensive outpatient, or they need a group practice with psychiatry, emergency, and regular therapy. But the receiving facility doesn't want to go through all that work to figure that out. So if you get a release of information, you can say in it, P.S., this client will no longer be appropriate for the level of care that I can provide. Please be sure to, case manage them into an appropriate level of care. I would love to be able to hear what the result of that is. Because now you have it on record that they can't just throw this client back into your lap, which is typically, they're short staffed and they're just trying to figure out a quick and easy way to move things forward. And I think that's dangerous for the client.
It is. It is. And those people do a hard job and they are overworked, but we need to make sure that we compensate for that so that we know that it's not going to come back on us. And we find out that this client has been discharged to us and we don't even maybe know for a few days. And all of a sudden now it's on us to find this other provider for them.
Right. Or the client just falls completely out of treatment and we have no idea that they've been released into our care. And so we're not doing what we would typically do. I'm looking out my window and there's a huge deer walking within 1.5 feet of my window. It just totally distracted me. Sorry, friends. It was
beautiful.
massive.
I love that.
With velveteen antlers. It was gorgeous.
Oh, wow.
I have no idea what I was saying. Help me, Janine.
Now I just lost my train.
Me neither.
Release back into our care and not even knowing it. We were talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they fall out of care and then something happens to them. We didn't know that they've been released in our care. Well, now we're the clinician of record and it's on paper that we're the clinician of record and we haven't followed up with them the way that we might normally if we knew that they had been released to our care. So just making sure that you've got those things in place.
And even having the confidence that now somebody has said you are able to tell a receiving facility they cannot come to you, because those are things that we feel insecure about. They're not things that a lot of times will get covered in our training programs, our grad programs. And I see so much fear in my members around, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? And, really it will come back to, let's look at safety, legality, and ethics, and let's figure it out from there. Yes. But you have more rights in your own practice than you want to allow yourself to believe in a lot of situations.
That's a really great summary. And I think too, just empowering, to follow up on that, empowering when you're moving somebody into an involuntary hospitalization. And you guys, if you've been around the block, this happens all the time. You've assessed them, they need to be there. They wait for 3 hours. And by the time they waited for 3 hours, they're like, I'll say anything to get the heck out of here. This is a pain in the butt, right? So they tell the receiving facility something different. The receiving facility releases them. So for me, I always think about, I want to make sure I've documented all of the things that client has said to me that makes me believe that they need to be in that facility. And I am faxing that over to the facility because I want it on their records that they've said these things so that I am sharing the liability. If they choose to release this person, they've done so with my assessment and their assessment. And that makes me feel better, because I don't know what that client might say to them, or if that assessor is just having a bad day and they're quickly moving through the assessment, right? If you document it, and remember, they're in crisis in that moment, so you can share it even without a release in most cases, right? Because you're trying to manage their safety, not after the fact, but during the fact. It's just another way to make sure that they're getting the type of care that they need to get, and that you're not just kind of passing the buck on to someone else and hoping that they're going to see the situation the same way that you did.
Yeah. And that's such a great point to bring up, because I know I've been on the phone once or twice negotiating with them about why they need to admit this person. And I'm like, I know you're not seeing all the things, but I've worked with this person. I'm telling you that this is a changed behavior, or this is concerning for this reason. And knowing that we can be involved to make sure that the right thing for that client is going to happen.
Yes. I've even had a situation where, and this is kind of like a pre-crisis situation, where I could see the client was falling in a particular direction. And the number one regret that therapists have when a client, I'm trying to think of like the appropriate words, if a client dies by suicide in your care, the clinical regret that therapists have is that they have not reached out to a psychiatrist for consult or for medication management or further assessment. And so I had referred this client who seemed to be going, downwards, to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was not following back up. And this is somebody that the client had seen before. So I was faxing, I was calling, I was emailing, and I wasn't hearing anything. And finally, I wrote, I just want to make it clear that you are the clinician of record for this client, and here are the risk factors that I'm seeing. And so this client needs an appointment ASAP. Please get back to me. And as soon as I said those words, you're the clinician of record, and here are the risk factors that I'm seeing, all of a sudden I heard back from that office. So sometimes you have to push some buttons to make sure that the client's getting the care they need.
Yes, absolutely.
If we have to push the buttons, we will push the buttons. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, just looking at my notes, we talked about the release of information. This is just like a clinical, especially for early therapists, transportation to the receiving facility. Different states and different counties have different rules about this. And so sometimes it can be really tempting to be like, well, your friend is there, your friend can take you, or your mom is there, your mom can take you. And sometimes that's okay. But if a client is in really, really, really serious risk, I really want to have them transported by a professional. I've had happen so many times that, like a mom is transporting, she stops by McDonald's on the way because she's like, oh, we're going to be sitting in the waiting room forever, And then they start talking, and then the client's like, well, maybe I don't need to go. And the mom's like, yeah, it's going to be expensive. And then it doesn't happen, and it needed to happen. So just think about what the transportation needs to be for your county or state, if there's any rules about that. And then also really use your clinical judgment rather than perhaps what the client or their friend or their mom might prefer with regard to transportation. I hate sending people with the police. In some counties, the police have to handcuff the client just because of their own rules. Some police are better trained in dealing with mental health than others. So I really prefer not to go that route if I don't have to. But if the risk is high enough, then that's what we're going to do, because I want that client to be safe, even if it's really uncomfortable in the process.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other thing that just kind of came to the forefront for me recently is making sure that we are staying apprised of what are the changes that are happening. So I was doing a training recently, and there was a therapist from my city on the training, and she was like, oh yeah, I'm a licensed therapist, and I ride along with police officers, and I'm there for crisis cases with the crisis intervention team. And I was like, and so, again, it's those things where it's a lot of work, but there are things that change, and we need to stay on top of that. And I would much rather know to call and ask for the crisis intervention team, knowing that licensed therapist is going to be there, than call it in and hope that that's who they contact.
Absolutely. I had a good friend, and she's even more neurotic than me. So she had all of the stuff written down. She was prepared. She went to the website. She printed off the involuntary hospitalization documents ahead of time. She was on her game. And a crisis happened. She followed the procedure, and the procedure involved faxing to some local government, whatever, a piece of paper, and then they would call you and facilitate the transfer. Nobody called. And she's on the phone or video call or whatever with the client. And turns out that they had never updated their website, and that was no longer the process. So nobody was even manning that stupid fax machine. Another deer just raced by my window.
Are there any squirrels there, Amber?
I know, right? I'm not hallucinating, and I'm not in crisis. So, I don't know that my friend could have done a better job, because she really did, go through all of the things, but just kind of being prepared too that things can go sideways. So have as much done ahead of time as you can. And for me, and, of course, I'm like over the top with this stuff, but I teach a mini course on managing crisis. We're pulling it out of step by step, and we're going to sell it separately. But I have pages of risk and resiliency assessments, so that, 3 pages, let's not get crazy. So that as I'm going through with that client, when the call is over and I'm laying in bed and thinking, did I cover all the bases? Was there a question that I didn't ask that I should have asked? I can just look at that form and know, like, check. I asked those questions. And especially on the resiliency side, because sometimes they're hitting all those risk factors, but you know them really well. And that they're not going to take action, sometimes it's very helpful to have the resiliency checklist to be able to kind of back that up in your own mind of like, okay, so here are the reasons why my intuition is telling me that they're not going to take action. And here are the reasons they're objectively telling me that they're not going to take action on these thoughts.
That because we know when we're in crisis, we're not thinking of all the things. And I even put together a decision tree for cases that have gray areas, the old crap cases that I talk about. And of course, I would always say as well that before you went to bed that night, Amber, did you reach out to a colleague to say, hey, I need to talk about this with somebody just to make sure I did it right?
Are
Otherwise,
you looking
I'm
at
going to
my
be awake
notes?
all night.
And that's why you need to join Collaboasis, because you will have a colleague down the hall who can pick up. Because the reality is, even if you have friends in the field, if you're not in a structured consultation group, my friend's not picking up the phone, right? Like they're sleeping, their phone is off. But if I have an agreement because I'm in like a clinical consultation group that I will be available to back somebody up, well, that makes me sleep a lot better at night.
It does. Absolutely. But the biggest thing that I run into is therapists that will say, well, it was after hours and I didn't really want to bug anyone. I'm like, none of us wants to be in that position. And we would want any of their other group members to be there for us. And so you're not asking for anything more than what the other people would be asking. So make the contact, tell the friend, I really need to talk to you right now, or the group member.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would want to be the person answering that phone because I'd want somebody answering that phone for me. I mean, it's just not only is it a relief to have somebody else kind of checking in your mind and their limbic system isn't activated, but just also knowing that you're providing that extra level of clinical care to your client and that you can document it. Those are all super reassuring things.
Yeah. Yeah. And as the group members get to know each other, they sort of learn each other's insecurities or the imposter syndrome buttons that are getting pushed. So sometimes they can just bring clarity. Like it sounds like you did a really, really great job and we've covered all the things. And I understand why this feels really scary. It should feel really scary when a client's in crisis. I don't think anyone should really ever feel completely in control. When a client is in crisis, there's a lot at stake. So I think people should want to make sure they're doing all the things. But to have that colleague who knows you, who says, maybe this feels even worse because you've had 3 high acuity clients recently and you're a little bit burnt out. So, maybe it feels worse than it normally would.
Oh, that's a great point. Or if you've had a client who recently dropped out of treatment, and that always kind of stings a little bit like, oh gosh, am I not doing a good job? And then you immediately have a crisis afterwards. You're already feeling like maybe I'm not doing a good enough job.
Absolutely. Yeah. We put so much on ourselves. And my experience is therapists set the bar so high, unrealistically high at times. And
Yes.
having someone that can help you find some grace for yourself to say, like, we've even had people come in that made a mistake. And, mistakes can be fixed. Most of the time, it's not going to be life or death, but to be able to open up, share the shame you're feeling, have people normalize the experience, affirm that you were doing the best you could in the moment, but let's figure out how you can move forward with this client. Let's figure out how you can correct that.
Yeah. When I was actively seeing clients, because I'm on a hiatus right now, and I was in Collaboasis, something that I really valued about it was that we are allowed to make mistakes and be fallible in there. And I find that when people try to get consultation in a Facebook group or even some like actual consultation groups, people they're one of two things. They're either super judgy and like, you totally screwed up and I'm reporting you to the board and you shouldn't have a license, which makes you never want to share anything. Or
Right.
they're so reassuring, like, oh, well, that was the client's fault. That's not your fault. You did everything you can, da 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 da. That there's no learning opportunity in either one of those. And I felt like when I was in Collaboasis, the women that I was in there with were so grounded and they weren't just kind, they were kind and they wanted to help me do the best job. So they were really honest, like, yeah, that, you probably could have done that part better. Let's talk about how you could have done it, but also maybe what made you vulnerable to going that direction. It's incredibly valuable, especially in a solo practice, to have people that you can trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those things are the reason I created my program, so that you have people that you get to know and trust, because it is really hard to be vulnerable, especially about this work that we care so deeply and we don't want to get it wrong. And the last thing you need is to show up somewhere feeling terrible and then have somebody, they're not there to help you. They're there to tell you you did it wrong, or it's unethical, or it's illegal. We love to throw those out in the Facebook groups instead of normalizing. I can see how that happened. Let's first of all make sure you're okay, and then let's move forward, because so much more happens than just case consultation. If you're in a really good group, you are forming relationships, you're getting to know these people, you can see some of their rough edges that they can't see, so you can help support them.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
I think that, so we covered before, we covered during, check, 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 check. Now after, and we talked a little bit about, after discharge, if it's a hospitalization, like who was the clinician of record and how to protect yourself by having conversations, signing a release, talking with the facility, but also really like warm handoffs. Because it's so discombobulating, first of all, to go inpatient. I mean, we know that that is not a fun experience. And then to feel like, and it's really easy for clients to feel like, oh, I got worse, so you're abandoning me. And if at all possible, if that client is leaving involuntary and they're going into, I don't know, an intensive outpatient or a different therapist or whatever, if it's possible and clinically supportive, I would like to have some case management contact with that client to do like, a caring goodbye, to do a warm handoff to the next provider, to send a summary of the records. I think it's just kind is the first part of it. I think it's just kind. And most of us have attachment wounds. And I think that that's a nice way of not recreating an attachment wound if we can help it. But I think it's also like the highest level of clinical care if you're really closing the loop on that portion of the treatment. Because who knows, they could come back to you after they've been through a course of treatment with this other provider. But I've had several situations where I've had to help somebody get a different form of treatment, and it could have felt really punitive, like, oh, you got worse, so see you later, Gator. And we don't want it to feel like that.
Yeah. And the value of the warm handoff is helpful in a lot of situations. If you were referring someone out, maybe they weren't hospitalized, but, for whatever reason, they're no longer the right fit, or something has come up and they need different care, to be able to say, I'm going to help you find the right person, and I'm going to be in touch with that person at the very beginning to make sure you're doing okay. And that gives us peace of mind too. We don't have to worry, did they actually schedule with that person? Are they really seeing anyone right now? No, I know this person has them on their radar. This person has them on their schedule. And so now this person has got them.
Right. And I'm just putting myself in the shoes of your listeners right now. And I'm imagining them thinking like, yeah. All this sounds great, but who has time or emotional capacity for all of that work? And I'm just going to use this as a moment to say, y'all, if you do not have the time and emotional capacity, you're not charging enough for your sessions, because you shouldn't be seeing so many clients that you don't have time to provide the highest level of care. And if that's your situation, then we got to figure out ways for you to be able to get paid more per hour. And there are 100 different ways to do that. Doesn't necessarily mean having to go cash pay or whatever. There's lots of ways to do that. That's a whole nother podcast. But yes, if you're in that position where it's going to take away from your own mental health, or, you're just not going to do it, then really it's time to look at your caseload and figure something out, because that's not an okay place for you to have to be in.
Absolutely. And so many of us are still recovering from the pandemic effects of having tons of clients swarming us and needing to get in, and we took on too many people thinking it was not going to last that long, and the level of burnout has been unreal. And so if you are someone who is still in that place, I highly recommend that you do some work to figure out what you need to do about your burnout. I'm not going to throw out the word self-care because that's overused, but there's lots of ways that you can learn to support yourself so that you can be your best therapist self for your clients and enjoy your life. We have a chance now to say, okay, that is over. What can we do moving forward so that we are better for our clients? And I think therapists forget that. And I get pushback sometimes when I'm talking about ideal clients, and managing energy for me has been huge since the pandemic. And so I will say, that client that's draining you is affecting all of your clients because you're not your best self because of that. And somebody else, that's their ideal client, and they're going to get amazing treatment from that client. So this isn't about, picking and choosing, but it's about making sure that the client's getting the best care and you also are taking care of yourself, which translates to better care for your whole caseload.
Yes. And, I think sometimes, there's so much to say. I think sometimes we don't refer out because we just don't know other providers who we trust and are good with that particular issue. And so again, if you don't, then what that means is you have not made time in your practice for an important part of having a private practice, which is getting to know other clinicians so that you do have people that you trust and can refer to. And if you're thinking, I don't have time to network or to get to know other people, well, that's a problem, right? That means seeing too many clients, doing too much admin work, and you need to shrink your caseload because there has to be time for case consultation. There has to be time for building relationships with other providers, or you're never going to be able to refer out. We care too much about our clients to refer to some random person, right? So it's somebody you've seen for a year and you need to refer them out. You're going to have a lot of hesitancy if you don't feel confident about that referral.
Absolutely. And for all the things that I dislike about therapist Facebook groups, that is a great way to meet other clinicians that you can develop that relationship with. My friendship with you started online. There's several other therapists that are invaluable to me and my work life and even my personal life. And I met them online, but it's a matter of seeing who's showing up. What are they saying? Maybe reaching out to them. Hey, we seem to have some things in common. Would you like to have a coffee chat? All of those things. So using the resources, but if you're not on Facebook, and I know there are lots of people who are leaving Facebook these days, so then call some, local solo practitioners. Solo practitioners always need referral sources. I always say that. And when people leave a group practice and it's really nasty, I'm like, that group practice is losing sight of the fact that you're always going to need referral sources and you're probably going to refer back to them because you know them.
Yes.
So, having that's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a pain in the butt, especially if you're an introvert, or you're socially anxious. And I check on both of those. So, but it's really worth the effort. And if you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't quote network and be salesy and slimy, do exactly what Janine just said. Reach out to people and be like, hey, seems like we have a lot in common, or we approach cases in the same way. Be really nice just to chat and learn more about your practice. I'm always looking for places that, even if you're not full right now, y'all, you one day will be. And you will be looking for people to refer clients to. Or you might have somebody come in the door and they're touching a countertransference issue for you. And like, I got the skills, but my heart is not going to survive this. Let me refer over here to my friend who works similarly as I do. Don't worry about selling yourself. Just get to know people. And that will naturally result in referrals. Not the point, but a side benefit.
It will. Yes, absolutely. And knowing that if you are lonely as a solo practitioner, they're lonely too. They're probably going to be thrilled to hear from you.
Yeah. One more thing I would add on to that I didn't think of before we started talking is, sometimes you feel financially strapped and you're not able to pay for clinical consultation yet, because you really should be paying for it if you're, in practice. I think it's very different than just free peer consultation. But something that's been helpful for me is doing morning pages every morning. And all that is writing for 3 consecutive pages. It's kind of like a sweeping out of your brain first thing in the morning, just clearing the cobwebs. And I am such a good compartmentalizer that there can be all sorts of stuff happening for me subconsciously that I am completely unaware of. I'm in doing mode and I'm just not attuned. But when I do morning pages, it shows up on that page and I can notice when I'm starting to feel tapped out with a particular clinical presentation, or I can notice that, whereas I used to be super excited to do sessions, I'm feeling, sluggish or something like that. And seeing it on paper, especially when it shows up repetitively, it kind of helps you tune in a little bit more, especially many of us have codependency issues. If you tend to be more tuned into what other people are thinking and feeling and not tuned into your own stuff, it can be a nice way to kind of tune into that to find out if you need some additional support.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. And I remember years ago you telling me about that and I completely forgot about it. So thank you for the reminder.
I love it. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that I'm the person that like does it every single morning and, I had this great morning routine. But typically what happens is I start feeling overwhelmed and discombobulated. And I'm like, I need to do morning pages again. And then I'll do it every day for several months and then I'll feel fine and I'll drop it. So it doesn't have to be perfect, y'all.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes you human, Amber.
What?
Sometimes I forget you're human because I have you up on this pedestal.
Oh, geez. Please don't. I don't want to fall.
Oh, no. In fact, I will just share the first time I met you in person, you were shorter than I thought you were going to be. And I think it's because of my view of you. And I was like, you're tiny. It's like, just doesn't fit with like who I thought you were.
That's hilarious.
There's nothing wrong with it. But I thought,
you're like, there's nothing wrong with you being smaller than I thought. I had that experience at Ernesto's conference, Not Your Typical Psychotherapist conference, and I got to meet everybody. And you guys, we see each other either from the chest up if we're on Zoom or these teeny tiny little pictures, and so we have no real idea what the full human looks like. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, everybody's so different than I thought they were.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's why those conferences are so much fun.
Yeah. We need to go to another one soon and make sure that they align so we're there together.
We need to find one on the East Coast, though. All of these things are happening on the West Coast, and that's just too far for me.
Well, I'm happy to fly to the East Coast.
Okay, good. I don't like to be on a plane all day long to get to the West Coast. So anyway, that's just my own preference. Amber, I'm so glad you've been here today. I do want to ask you if you would share with the listeners a favorite catchphrase or analogy that you like to use with clients.
My favorite, and I like to use it with clients and myself, is it's never too late to be who you might have been. And then I pair that one with, and I have no idea who said either one of these things, y'all, so Google it. I pair that one with, we are what we repeatedly do. And so when I think about like, I always want to be the person who exercises more and be like, super strong and have all this endurance. And, I may or may not ever actually accomplish that. But I tell myself, it's never too late to be who you might have been. And the way that you're going to do that is just do the thing repeatedly. We are what we repeatedly do. So if I repeatedly go to the gym, then I am a person who is a gym person. I'm a physically fit person. So they always make me feel hopeful. Like, okay, I can start this.
Yes, I love that. And those, not only is it encouraging, but then you're also giving them a method to go behind it too. So I really love that.
Yeah.
Well, Amber, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been fun chatting with you. Please tell the listeners where they can find out more about what you have to offer. You've got the step-by-step program. If somebody wants I asked you, now I'm going to speak for you. If someone wants a really intensive training on how to be the best online therapist you can be, and there's so much more than what we discussed today. You've got step-by-step for that, and you also have the marketing program. So people that don't like to do the type of networking we were talking about today, there's so many other ways for introverts to get connected and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think like free material, if you go to the online therapist group on Facebook, that's, it's a huge group and you can search it for topics that you're interested in. I have a YouTube channel. I think it's called Online Income for Therapists, but just YouTube my name and you'll find it. And we cover everything there from starting a practice to filling your practice, insurance or private pay, to online income outside of therapy. And then I will give a link to you, Janine, that is, it just connects to all the things that I offer, from coaching to courses to consultation, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, great. And I will put those in the show notes so people will be able to easily find those.
Awesome.
For everyone listening, there are new episodes of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast released every Thursday on all major platforms. Please remember, our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely. Thank you so much for listening to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to colleaguedownthehall.com, where you'll be able to learn more about getting the clinical support you need and resources to help you work in a supported, sustainable way. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your therapy friends and colleagues. Subscribe to the podcast, and if you love this episode, please leave a review.